Hello and welcome to the first of two of what I am referring to as the snowstorm lectures. This one is a continuation of the lecture that we had, lecture number 6 on Monday. I'm actually going to go back over, start at the beginning of Augustus, just because I think that I'd like to do the Julio-Claudians all in one solid state lump. So I'll just go over the first part of Augustus, which we did do in class. You just get to hear it again for posterity. There will be a second a second lecture in the series. It is going to be on everything else from Nero on. All right, so without further ado, let me remind ourselves where we left off with Augustus. He is the sole man left standing, and he really holds all the reins of power in the Roman Empire, or the Roman thing, as I tend to call it. So if you weren't in lecture Monday, I can tell you the structure of this is going to be, we're going to look at each emperor. I start off with a slide that gives sort of the basic details of that person's life/career. And then we move on. Just a handful of slides about each emperor, the major things that they did, the major things that occurred during their reign, perhaps the legacy that they left behind, which the succeeding emperor built upon. So first we have Augustus, the first one for over 300 years. He was also the longest reigning emperor, which is quite an interesting, quirky little statistic there. We can see born in 63 BCE as Gaius Octavius. At the age of 19, he's adopted by Julius Caesar, as we know, and he takes on the adopted name of Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. He was a triumvir, so it's part of that partnership with Antony and Lepidus, which lasted until the civil war with Antony. And then we refer to him as the emperor from 27 BCE to 14 CE. So this is the individual that brings us from BCE to CE. At 27, we're going to find out that he now becomes Augustus, a title that he took great pride in and which he used exclusively, certainly filled all his coinage with it. Another position that he held, we're going to talk about a few of the positions that he held, but another position he held was chief priest. Again, reminding us of the primacy of religion and sort of the authority and legitimacy that religion can provide to a Roman ruler, particularly. The chief priest before him, if you wonder why he waited until 12 BC, it's because Lepidus, one of the three members of the last triumvirate, was chief priest. He was the Pontifex Maximus. And he and Augustus never did split. He went along to get along. And as a result, unlike all the other unsuccessful triumvirs in Roman history, who typically either committed suicide or died on the battlefield, Lepidus died of old age in his bed, and he died as the chief priest of Rome. You notice that Augustus had 3 wives. Like marriages in the senatorial class, these are not romantic marriages. These are marriages of political alliance. What's interesting, though, is that the first 2 were very short-lived. Livia, he actually was married to for over 50 years. So any gossip that might have cropped up, and there always is some, about how Livia was pulling the strings behind his back and engineering people away from the succession or engineering people towards the succession, makes a great soap opera. The fact that they were married together for over 50 years suggests a stability that all of that conspiracy wouldn't really function well in. So I'm quite skeptical of anything that says that Livia was the evil power behind the throne. Anyway, so after the Battle of Actium, which is 31 BCE, there's a few years where it's kind of just consolidating things, it's tidying things up. Uh, Sextus Pompeius has been defeated, but there were still pockets of resistance. Individuals who weren't that thrilled with Augustus were able to organize a certain amount of manpower. It was very small, it was very insignificant, and it was dealt with quite easily. The main thing was to try to shore up the power, so that not so that Augustus could have total power and rule everyone, but mainly just so that there's stability. He's going to be successful if the society is stable, if the government is stable, and if you want stability, you need to have contentment. So it's making sure that the players are content, and that we can now just manage things. And that is one thing that Augustus was quite good at. It took a while. They didn't get it right the first time. In fact, it took about 10 years almost before they got things that it's like everybody was completely content. Like I say, he's the last man standing. As you know, after the Battle of Actium, I can't call him Augustus yet. Octavian had, just like Julius Caesar, he had support in the Senate. Senators who really weren't very fond of him or hadn't been fond of Julius Caesar probably had taken up Mark Antony's side. So they'd either been killed in the war, they'd been proscribed like Cicero, um, or they had been won over, where they'd fought against Octavian, and he had an opportunity to show clemency and say, you know what, I understand how you feel. You can still be a senator. And that created a nice bit of gratitude. The troops and the veterans were definitely on Augustus or Octavian's side, particularly the ones where he found land for them because they had hit retirement age for a soldier. They served their years out, and they were now able to have their land and be sort of full functioning citizens. And the third was the Roman people. They were hugely behind him. They were not particularly on the Senate side, even though the Senate could be argued to be representing traditional Roman Republican values. The people in Rome didn't see it that way. They preferred Antony over the Senate, and now they preferred Octavian over everything. So, how do you organize things to keep everybody happy? Because Julius Caesar was killed by a couple of dozen disaffected senators. That's all it took. A couple of dozen people in the wrong place at the wrong time. And now your back is full of knives or knife wounds. So Octavian learned that lesson, learned it very well, and decided he needed to keep the senators happy. Everyone else was happy. He kept the soldiers happy by pensioning them off and making sure they were well looked after, so the veterans are happy. The soldiers who are serving him can see, okay, if Octavian is in charge, I know I can look forward to a good retirement. So I'm on board with Octavian. The people are, and we're going to see what Octavian did to keep the people on side. Took substantial measures, and they were effective. So it's mainly just keeping the Senate as a body happy, making sure there aren't chunks of the Senate that are unhappy. And then we've seen this before, the personal loyalty of the army. And a lot of the army had been fighting on Mark Antony's side. So somebody could perhaps take up the banner of the I represent Mark Antony. So there's a little concern there. Anyway, Octavian was quite clever about this. His first thing he did when he got up into the Senate was said, Civil War's over, everything's fine, I'm going to resign, and I'm just going to retire. Pretty early to retire. At 27, he's only 36 years old. That's a long retirement. Anyway, that's what he says. And it's basically to spook everyone. It's to make the Senate think, oh my gosh, if we don't have a strong person in charge, we're all just going to start fighting each other again and backbiting, and we're going to have more civil war. Oh my God, we can't have that. So and this was set up, let's be honest. He had senators who were prepared to say, oh, here, we don't want that. We want to set something up that we can share power and have stable society, stable government. So this was the proposal that was made, which both the Senate and Octavian said, yeah, good idea. He was allotted the following provinces to govern on a 10-year mandate. So we've seen this before. We've seen Julius Caesar got a 5-year mandate to govern Gaul back in 59 BCE. We've seen senators get multiple provinces. He got nearer Gaul and further Gaul, or he got nearer Spain and further Spain. And they would set a term of, often it was 5 years. Here, they're just taking that principle and that precedent and just stretching it a little. 10-year mandate, and the provinces are the ones that are in the red. Spain, Gaul, Syria, which looks like a fortune cookie off to the east, Egypt. They will be governed by senators who have Praetorian rank. And remember, a Praetorian is somebody who is allowed to lead an army. And they are answerable not to the Senate. They are answerable directly to Octavian because he technically is the governor. So there's somebody out there in the field, in Spain, for instance, doing the work. But he's acting as the representative of Octavian. Octavian is the governor in name, and anything that happens out in Spain, he's going to get credit for. Anything that goes wrong, he can always blame the guy that's out there. But he is technically the governor of all these places, even though he can't be there in person. The blue provinces are allotted to the senators. And it's the normal thing, it's 5-year stint. This allows senators the opportunity to govern provinces. So it's not like Augustus says, I'm going to govern all the provinces. I'm just taking certain ones. Typically the ones that have the largest armies, because that's where the risk lies. You send out somebody to a province, they have a large army under their, 6, 8 legions, for instance. They are now a threat to you as the leader. They're a threat to Rome because they could come back, march against Rome, take over power. We've seen this happen. That's exactly what Julius Caesar did. He had so many legions out in Gaul, he could just come down through the north of Italy and say, guess what? I'm in charge. So by most of the army being under the direct control of Octavian, you eliminate that problem. There's going to be hiccups, but they're not going to happen for decades. And the important thing here is that the senators get to govern provinces. They get to feel like they are full functioning senators who still have, if not all, almost all of their power, almost all of their authority. Octavian also had the power to appoint military tribunes, which is a senior military officer, and procurators. So these are the individuals who looked after government property or his own personal property, because he The estate of Julius Caesar had lands and interests throughout the empire. These people would look after that, and he picks those. He is given the honorary title Augustus. Okay, so now I can start calling him Augustus, which has kind of a quasi-religious feel to it. It's sort of the honored one, the not quite holy. It doesn't have that. It doesn't go quite as far as that, but it is someone who is a little bit different from you and I, and it is not by the fact because he has a huge army behind him. That's just a military dictator. The August one is someone who has some religious authority behind them, and we recognize that. Consular elections are going to resume because we want the Senate to be operating as close to normal, as close to the good old days, which is what the senators want, as possible. So we're going to have regular consular elections. The magistrates have their powers, right? The quaestors are in charge of finance. The praetors are in charge of the courts. So if you're a senator and you're just going to, you just started your senatorial career as a quaestor, you can follow that career and expect to be able to become a praetor, become a consul, govern a province, all those things that your ancestors did for generation after generation. That's still available to you, even though we live in reality, a one-person rule. And the last thing is that he took the title Princeps Civitatis, which is first citizen. And it's this idea of he is not higher or stronger than anyone else. He is first among equals. And they use that term in the Senate, primus inter pares. He's the first among equals. Nobody really believed it. Certainly no one pushed it or tried to chat. It's like, hey, if we're all equals, then, I can get into an argument with Augustus, or because, hey, he's just my equal like I would anybody else in the Senate. Nobody did that. Nobody was that silly. On the other hand, Augustus lived his life and conducted himself in a way that de-emphasized the fact that he was so much in charge. He lived a fairly simple lifestyle. He didn't wear expensive clothes. He was not interested in conspicuous consumption at all. So not only did he present himself and behave like an average senator, in fact, I would say that he presented himself and just naturally behaved like a relatively modest senator. He'd be the if it was nowadays, he would not be pulling out. He wouldn't be driving a Tesla. He wouldn't be driving a Porsche. He'd probably be driving a Honda or a Toyota. That's the way Augustus he just lived his life. So he didn't flaunt this power that he had, and that made him very popular with the senators. It made it a lot more easy for them to accept the fact that he was as big as he was. Anyway, so we have that. Generally speaking, works. And really, for the next 40 years, Augustus's main projects and main purposes are stable government, stable succession. So keeping things going, not having civil war, civil disruption, mob violence, and having things set up so that when he dies, there's not going to be a civil war because there's a power vacuum. Things are already kind of set up as to who everyone will recognize as the next Princeps Civitatis, or first citizen. Anyway, so part of the maintaining stable government was that we had to tweak this arrangement. 24 years later, 23 BC, some flaws started to make themselves felt. The biggest problem was that Augustus was holding the consulship every year from 31 to 23 BCE. That takes away the chance of other senators to become consul. He's hogging the consulship. It's tough enough to become a consul. We've got 20 praetors. So if you do the math on this, after 20, you got 20 guys who are praetors. 3 years later, they are all eligible to run for consul. Only 2 of them could win. But so that's tough enough. You got to be in the 90th percentile, assuming everybody runs. But now you've got Augustus is taking one of the consulships away. Now there's only one chance. So it was hard enough before. Now it's like, so Augustus resigns the consulship. From 23 on, he's only going to hold it a couple more times, and it was for sort of special occasions. To replace the power and authority that the consulship gives him, he is voted special powers, but they are within a constitutional framework, and they are defined in traditional ways. So he's not like taking on some or creating some new role or some new power command that makes him an autocrat. He's just they're taking things that already exist, and he's actually only taking parts of those things. So for instance, he doesn't get elected tribune of the people, but he is given the power of a tribune of the people. So they describe it as tribunician power, and it allows him veto. So anybody suggests anything, he can say no, and that's it. Just like a tribune of the people. So people are familiar with this. Everyone knows that this thing exists, and it's just Augustus has it. Also, his person is sacrosanct. So you're not allowed, you're not allowed to kill people anyway, but you're not allowed to like go up and rough them up or push them around physically. He was given something called, and it's a technical term, greater power in the provinces. I probably should have capitalized that. He's given greater power, which means if it comes down to him as a governor and then the governor of the neighboring province, and their decisions run contrary to each other, Augustus wins. He has the ability to overrule a fellow governor. And again, this is something that actually existed before. The notion of not all governors are equal. Some governors are more senior, have greater power, greater authority than other governors. They're just applying it now to Augustus. And this one, which we talked about this on Monday, but if you weren't there on Monday, got to bring it up again. He had the right to speak first in the Senate. Doesn't sound like a big deal. The right to speak first in the Senate has existed for centuries. It is typically... Okay, my apologies for that. I have a car with a flat tire thanks to a pothole. It's almost ready to be picked up. Let's finish this. Right to speak first in the Senate. So in the Senate, like I say, this has always existed. This right is actually not that valuable for Augustus, except that he gets collateral benefit. This is actually something that helps the senators, because for the sake of stability and to avoid civil war, the senators, generally speaking, are going to agree with Augustus. And then fortunately for everybody involved, Augustus is reasonably sensible stuff. He's not going to make his senator he's not going to make his horse the consul or have any sort of radical, strange ideas. He governs very conservatively, small c conservatively. So it's very useful to have Augustus speak first, because now you know what he's thinking, you know what he wants, and you can either just totally agree with him, or you can adapt what you want to fit in with what he wants. So you might want something a bit different, but you can adapt it. On the other hand, if you go first and you get out and you know, nail your colors to the mast and say very strongly that you want X, and it turns out that Augustus wanted Y, that's going to cause conflict. It's probably going to make you feel a little uncomfortable too. So very much benefit to the Senate to have a sense of what is it that that Augustus wants. So that was it sounds like a tiny little minor administrative thing, has some profound useful benefits. Anyway, so here we've got a coin, and a couple of things you note. First of all, it says SC, so Augustus is reminding everyone that this is all being done by senatorial decree. The things that he does are done by senatorial decree, not by his own decree. And two of the things that are noted on the coin are that he's been a conquering general 20 times, that his father happens to be divine, wink, wink, and that he has held tribunician power 34 times. So this will become the way that all the emperors down the line are going to measure their reigns, by how many years they have held tribunician power. They count that one. It's not how many years I've been the chief priest, or what year is this since the founding of Rome. It is the tribunician power, which is kind of interesting because it suggests very strongly that the Roman emperors, to start with, presented themselves as the champions of the people, as being on the people's side, very populist, and that helped. That means that the people's support was very important to the emperor. The fact that they would define themselves by how they were the champions of the people. All right. 40 years, lots of material. We could do an entire course just on the reign of Augustus, and it'd be an interesting one, I got to say, because there's also a lot of literature going on there. You guys are going to be reading Virgil. You guys are going to be reading Ovid. They're both authors of the Augustan age. They wrote during Augustus's principate. But we don't have that time, so just a few tidbits. The joke is that Augustus suffered from an Oedipus complex. And his own line was, "I found Rome a city of brick. I left it a city of marble." So he took enormous pride in his building program and how he sort of brought Rome up, not just to be a world-class city, because it already was one of the biggest cities in the Mediterranean world, but that he made it a really impressive city. It's the kind of thing, it's matching Athens, it's matching Alexandria, some of the great ancient cities of the ancient world. It not only makes Rome look impressive, again, this is the populist part, it provides an enormous amount of work. It just gives people a chance to earn money, which tended to attract more people into Rome, which is why Rome was the first city to have 1 million people. Now, here's an interesting one. And again, it's all about being a populist. He gave out something called donatives. So those are basically gifts of money. The closest example I can think of is that I think it was in 2006. The Alberta government actually had a surplus and they gave it back to the people as a dividend. Every single Albertan citizen, whether you were, 6 months old or 96 years old, got, I think it was $200. They didn't invent doing that. Augustus did that. He did it 6 times and he tells us about it. So we actually have the statistics. Not counting Julius Caesar's will. So he gave up 400 sesterces to the citizens in Rome, individuals, and at least 250,000 of them. Oh, that got it. Sorry about that. That was out of order there. His adopted father, Julius Caesar's will, left 300 sesterces to every citizen of the city of Rome, and that was at least 250,000 people. Another 400,000 in 24 BCE, another 411, 240 sesterces in 5, but it went to 320,000 citizens. 240 in 2 BC, that went to 200,000 citizens. And I should say, by the way, when he gives these numbers of how many people received it, he says at least this many. So by Augustus's own recording, these are minimum numbers. Might have been 260, might have been 270,000, we don't know. But we know that he said at least this many. So if you add all that up, do the math, those 6 gifts of money are 500 million sesterces, or 500 million sesterces. So this got brought up in class on Monday. I think it was one of the last things we talked about, and that is this. It strikes me, and it struck some of the people in class, that this would create hyperinflation. If you suddenly dump 300 sesterces, that is 3 months' pay. If you suddenly gave everybody in the city of Vancouver 3 or 4 months' pay as a gift, it's not taxable, you just plunk that money in their hands. That is flooding the economy with cash. And so anytime you have a flood of anything, it makes it really cheap. Anyway, won't get into that. Economists, though, can contemplate that if anybody wants to studying economics. Think about how that may have affected the economy for a short period of time. But we do see an enormous amount of money being plugged in. There's a form of recreation of the Forum Augustus, by the way. That's going back to the building program. What else have we had? Now, and Augustus left a document called My Deeds, and it's basically the things I did. And he talks about bringing peace to the empire, talks about how much he built, I rebuilt this temple, I built a brand new something else. And 40 years itself speaks to success and stability. One thing that poor Augustus had a lot of difficulty with, though, was the succession. Who was going to take over from him when he died? So he started addressing this quite early on. He didn't wait until he was a little old man. He was, in fact, 40 when he became extremely ill, and he genuinely thought he was going to die. And certainly those around him were concerned. At the age of 40, he hadn't really given much thought to, if something happens to me, who is going to provide that stability to the Senate and provide that stability to the Roman thing. So when he recovered, he started working on succession. And so, for instance, he started off with his nephew Marcellus. He adopted, and this sounds often the steps that people take are exactly the same as something that just happened a few years ago, right? There's not a lot of, oh, do we adapt this idea or whatever? No, we're just going to do exactly what happened before. So Julius Caesar adopted his nephew. Augustus did not have any male offspring. He never did, but he adopted his nephew. Unfortunately, Marcellus had the bad luck of dying the same year. So immediately Augustus had to come up with a second plan. So his second idea was this. His partner in his success up until 23 was Marcus Vipsanius Agrippa, who was not a particularly prominent individual before Augustus. So he really owed all of his success and prominence to Augustus, which generally speaking tended to make someone pretty loyal. And in this case, it did. So Augustus married off his daughter to Agrippa. And he was promoted as being sort of a partner in Augustus's work. And this is it. The idea is he never actually adopted Agrippa, by the way. He never made him his successor. But the idea was we're putting something in place. Here is somebody who is competent to take over the work I'm doing. And then the plan is he's going to have children. They are going to be my grandchildren, so that you have that direct bloodline through my daughter. And in fact, Agrippa's marriage was fairly successful in that regard. He had two sons, Gaius and Lucius. When Lucius was born, the second of them, Augustus adopted them both. And their careers were advanced. So the idea was, and again, this is not radical stuff, right? Remember, this is what senators do. They promote the careers of their sons. So if I was a consul in 250 BCE, I've got a son. I think, okay, I want him to be a consul. He wants to be a consul. So I'm going to help him with his political career. And the general expectation is, and everybody in the Senate around me is, oh yeah, as long as this guy isn't incompetent, yeah, him becoming senator, him becoming consul makes total sense. So everybody kind of agrees that that's what should happen. That's that closed shop in the Senate. So here, basically, you just have Augustus. If you think of him as being a senator with senatorial powers and with sort of extra authority and extra experience, extra powers that have been given to him by the Senate, it makes sense that his bloodline should achieve the same level of success that he has. So it's not like, oh, I'm a king, these are princes, they're going to follow me simply because of like divine heredity. It is, this is my job, this is my career, and these are my offspring or my descendants, and they will be following in my footsteps because that's what we all do. So, unfortunately, the best laid plans, Lucius died in 2 CE, Gaius died in 4 CE, and Augustus was back to square one again. Agrippa had died in 12 BCE. As I say, he was never going to be the princeps. When he died, he had provided the grandsons that were required. But yes, now we get to 4 CE. Well, now, Augustus is in his mid to late 60s, and he's back to square one again. So, undaunted by the passing of so many preferred candidates, Augustus adopted his next candidate, and that was Livia, his wife's stepson, because she had a son from a previous marriage. And although Tiberius had never been promoted in the Senate, he had held positions in the Senate, but mainly it was like praetor so that he could command an army. Very successful military career. He adopted Tiberius. Now, Tiberius is no spring chicken. he's a mature man, not a whole lot younger than Augustus himself. But as part of this, because Augustus is thinking, okay, Tiberius doesn't have a lot of years more than me, Tiberius adopts his own nephew, Germanicus, who again has a very successful military career, and he's also somebody who's very popular with the people. So Tiberius, not that he's unpopular with the people, he just isn't that popular with them. So we're covering the same bases. We're ticking the boxes that we want to tick. Military success, which gets you the military support, popular support. So Tiberius kind of covers the military. Germanicus covers the popular support. There are some other figures in this story, though. We have Agrippa Posthumus, who was the third son of Marcus Agrippa, who was born actually after his father died. And in fact, the word posthumous was often given in Roman society to a son who was born after his father died. He was a posthumous birth. Julia the Elder was the daughter of Augustus. She's the wife of Agrippa, and they actually had a daughter, Julia the Younger. So that's mother and daughter. Or you could say, Julia's the daughter of Augustus. Sorry, Julia the Elder is the daughter. Julia the Younger is the granddaughter. Some kind of something went wrong, and Augustus felt need to actually exile these three individuals, even though they were members of his own family. The story we get for the daughters is that they committed adultery and that they were exiled for that because Augustus put himself very much forward as the defender of good old-fashioned Roman moral values, moral rectitude. He actually had a program for people who were getting married that if they had at least 3 children, they had all kinds of rights and privileges because he felt that the senatorial class, there weren't enough of them. They weren't reproducing enough. Agrippa Posthumus is a little bit more difficult to understand. The sources tell us that he had a brutish, uncouth nature, that he basically refused to be educated. All he was interested in was like fishing and horse racing. He wasn't interested in the pursuits of politics, of governance, of military leadership. Some scholars think that that's nonsense, that no one would be exiled just for that. Given some of the other comments Augustus has made about other individuals, it's not that exceptional for Augustus to do that. He was very aware of his personal image with the Romans and how important that was to success and stability. And I think he just read Agrippa Posthumus as somebody who was not going, by his own lifestyle, was not going to be helping that out. So whatever reason it was, he was exiled as well. You notice, by the way, Agrippa Posthumus, he was never adopted by Augustus, unlike his 2 older brothers. Anyway, eventually, as it happens to all of us, or will, on August the 19th, 14 CE, Augustus breathed his last. His ashes were interred in a mausoleum that he had constructed. And there's the family mausoleum there. He was survived by his wife of over 50 years, Livia, and his heir and adopted son, Tiberius. So Tiberius, a little bit like King Charles III, comes to become the first citizen of Rome at the tender age of 54 years. That itself is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, we probably would think that world leaders in their 50s, that kind of makes sense. The problem is that he'd never shown any interest in governance, and he wasn't very good at it. He himself, I think, taking on the role of Augustus would have said that he's not very good at it. And he was right. By the way, here we have coinage, which shows this is Tiberius Caesar, and it says that he is son of Augustus, son of the divine Augustus, excuse me, and he himself is Augustus as well. Anyway, because after his death, just like Julius Caesar, he was deified by the decree of the Senate. So he became the divine Augustus. Tiberius, just like Augustus before him, is now the son of the divine. And in fact, Tiberius can say son of a divine and grandson of a divine, because by adoption, he is the grandson of Julius Caesar. And that's what the coin tells us. All right. So Tiberius. Tiberius is born in 42 BCE, so he's only 21 years younger than Augustus. Like we saw, he was adopted in 4. He held the consulship on 5 occasions, as a matter of fact. There's 4 of the years. He was I would say emperor, but he was the princeps from 14 to 37. So that's pretty good. That's 23 years. And given that he didn't start until he was in his 50s, that's pretty good longevity. Like Augustus, he's the Pontifex Maximus. He has tribunician power. He was married twice. By all accounts, his first marriage, which was to Vipsania, was a very happy marriage. It was a marriage that he would not have left voluntarily. But when Agrippa died, Augustus married Julia the Elder to Tiberius. The stories are that was a very unhappy marriage. Whether it was or not, we can't tell. They had children, so it couldn't have been totally, totally unhappy. He had his son Drusus Julius Caesar. Died March 37. So I guess he was a little short of the full 23 years, but close enough. Before he ascended to the Principate, he'd enjoyed, as I said, a very successful military career in the East. Here you can see the area of Western Europe, Northwestern Europe, that is light yellow, is territory that Tiberius added to the empire. So you can see he's been very successful that way. There was a story that floated around that he was a brutal commander. The line about him was that his drills were bloodless battles and his battles were bloody drills. So in other words, actually being at war, fighting the enemy, was no worse than the drills he made his troops undergo. But that 54 years before he became the emperor was not just spent serving as a soldier or serving as a general in the army. In fact, at one point, just when he was about to be made a partner with Augustus in governing the Roman thing, he retired entirely from public life to the island of Rhodes. He just chucked it all in, not interested. And so there's Rhodes. You can see nowhere near Rome. We're way off the southern end of what's now Turkey. It's not even particularly close to mainland Greece. So he really is going off by himself. And he stayed there for 9 years, from 6 BCE to 4 CE. And it wasn't until, with both Gaius and Lucius dying, and they died of natural causes, by the way. It wasn't until they both died and Augustus desperately needed a successor that Augustus kind of forced him out of retirement to come back from Rhodes at the age of 54 in order to help him with, again, maintaining the stability of the government, maintaining the stability of the succession. The year before Augustus died, as a matter of fact, Tiberius, so for 9 years, he was promoted as this is the person who will be the successor. And unlike other candidates, Tiberius had the good sense to keep on living. So when we got, you know, Augustus is in his mid 70s now, he actually gave Tiberius powers and authorities that were equal to his own. And I say he gave them to him. All of this is done by decree of the Senate. So the Senate decreed that Tiberius's power, Tiberius's authority, all those things like tribunician power, um, greater power over the governors, all these things were voted to Tiberius. And so at that point, we've got like sort of full succession, totally in place. Everything's ready to go by decree of the Senate. And so when Augustus dies, Tiberius is kind of already there anyway. He's like the co-owner. And the Senate simply confirms that and votes Augustus Divine Honors, which is kind of the approval that you did a good job. So he's Tiberius is Augustus. He has tribunician power. He is chief priest, and he is conquering general a lot, as you can imagine. His general policies were to stick to whatever Augustus did. So if Augustus had planned something or was in the middle of doing something, Tiberius just left it alone. If Augustus had made a decision, and you're going to find out from Jessica that one of his things was that he sent the poet Ovid into exile. When Augustus died, Ovid petitioned to be able to come back from exile, and Tiberius said no. And there's no sense that he held anything against Ovid. It was just, no, this was a decision and a policy that Augustus had put in place, and he wasn't going to contradict it. So he was doing nothing. Tiberius had his own challenges. Like I say, he wasn't particularly interested in being the emperor or the Augustus or the princeps, however you want to call it. And his own successors have passed away before him. He lived too long. Germanicus, his nephew, died when he was out east. And his own son, Drusus, died. So in 26, after having been in the Augustus for 12 years, he kept the title, he kept everything, but he retired to the island of Capri. Capri, if you look there, is due south of Rome and a little bit to the right. It's a very small island. It's kind of off the coast of where the Romans go on holiday if they have that much wealth. There it is there. He never set foot in Rome again. Never set foot in Rome again. He stayed on the island. He did latterly come over to the mainland, but he never went back to Rome again. And yet he was the Augustus for 11 more years. He in the role of looking after things, kind of like the governor, right? I govern Gaul, but there's someone else there actually doing the work. He appointed an individual named Sejanus. He referred to him in official documents as his partner in labors. So he wasn't thinking of him as a successor. He was just, this is the person who is working with me, getting all of this stuff done, getting all the tasks done. It would appear from what we can see, and it's tough because the sources hate Sejanus, that Lucius Aelius Sejanus was trying to edge himself into being the successor to Tiberius. Now, Sejanus is kind of like Agrippa. He was a really minor individual. before up until this point. And there are a lot of senators who are way more senior, a lot more closely connected by marriage or by birth to Tiberius, who would say, whoa, where's this guy come from? And the Romans care about that stuff. So when Tiberius got wind, as the story goes, when Tiberius got wind of Sejanus's efforts and really understood what he was trying to do to almost seize power, he sent a letter. He didn't go himself. He sent a letter to the Senate, which was read out loud, and the Senate, or the letter, condemned Sejanus as a traitor and condemned him to death. And so he was sentenced to execution. And it was a fairly bloody job at that. I am going to stop now. We're only 13 slides into a 29 slide presentation, and I don't want this to get overly long. This is already almost an hour. So I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to I split this little lecture into 2 smaller lectures. So we're done here. This part of the lecture is over. For Caligula and the rest of the Julio-Claudians, it's on to the next lecture.